In Silver Reef, there's a museum. You actually, you kind of have to pay a little, but I considered it worth it because there really had quite a lot of information about Silver Reef and what it was like mining, back in the day. They had all kinds of interesting stuff like the different cures that people got. There was a Chinese population, and so they kind of taught them about some Chinese herbs. But you also had the snake oil salesman that would come through selling stuff that I guess some of it was really toxic and would kill you. But Wells Fargo had like a little bank, a little safe. This museum is in the Wells Fargo building, which is actually the only original still standing building of this ghost town. But there was so many interesting random things, and they have these cute guys that are dressed in period attire. Most of them were carrying six shooters, but one looked a little pacifisty and he just had a knife. But anyway, they give you lots of historical information. My guess is they live nearby. But they have lots of really neat samples of things. For instance, pocket knives still pretty much look the same now as they did back then. So I found that interesting, compared to a lot of the other tools, which were quite dated. And then I love that little teeny stove. I don't know if it was a toy or kind of what was going on there, but lots of interesting things. There was a significant Chinese population here, and they weren't allowed to mine because they didn't want that to take away from white people or whoever's money, but they had all the businesses. So you actually had Chinese food, you had China dolls, you had, they did all the laundry, they pretty much did all the sewing and the cleaning. So I found that kind of interesting. I love to see the attire of, what people wore back then. I find that kind of interesting too. How everybody was always really, really covered. If you were lucky, you saw hands and maybe a little bit of face, but that was about it. Of course, it can't be a Wild West Utah town without some firearms. So they had some really good examples of the different rifles and handguns and, six shooters. And I'm just imagining how it must have been back then in the wild times out here in the Wild West, especially with mining. Things had to have been pretty crazy indeed.